Hi everybody, my name is Rob Murray, and the essay we're going to be going over in this video can be found on pages 294 to 297. It's by John Katz, and it's titled How Boys Become Men. And the first discussion question at the end of the essay was, in order to explain how boys become men, John Katz must first explain how boys become boys. By what specific rules does this process occur according to him? And John Katz kind of starts off trying to explain the way that boys often violently and illogically become boys by laying out 5 simple rules that boys must follow as they're conditioned to behave the way that boys do. 1 is don't be a goody-goody. 2 is never rat. If your parents ask about bruises, shrug. 3 is never admit fear. Ride the roller coaster, join the fist fight, do what you have to do. Asking for help is for sissies. 4 is that empathy is for nerds. You can help your best buddy under certain circumstances. Everyone else is on his own. And the last one he lays out is that you should never discuss anything of substance with anybody. Grunt, shrug, dump on teachers, laugh at wimps, talk about comic books. Anything else is risky. So the follow-up question to that was, is Katz right, do you think, in his process analysis of how boys are brought up? Why or why not? To me, the rules that are laid out by Katz in this essay seem a little bit like an antiquated prescription for the way that boys become boys. My own upbringing was quite different. For instance, I grew up with parents who were separated, and I was the youngest of my mom's 3 kids. My older sister is 13 years older than me, and my older brother is 5 years older than me. So, it was mostly my mom that I grew up with, and she did a great job making sure that I was not only unafraid of my own emotions, but also helped me to become in tune with them. So if you're lucky, like I was, and you have a parent or another mentor level older person in your life who's open, who's in tune with their emotions, and who's empathetic, maybe you don't have to follow the rules that Katz lays out. I was also fortunate in that I was the baby, and so as I started to grow up, I saw a lot of the mistakes that my older sister and older brother had made and decided I didn't want to make them for myself. There was a time, though, that kind of came to mind as I was reading this essay where I got into a fight with a bully in first grade. His name was Alex, and the way that he chose to bully me was by sticking his chewed gum down the back of my shirt, just kind of like pulling my collar back and just dropping it in, and then pressing my shirt against it so that my shirt would stick to his chewed gum against my back. It had gone on for quite a while. My mom really never mentioned it to my dad, and so when my dad was helping me get dressed for bed on one of the weekends that I was with him, my shirt was stuck to the gum on my back from earlier that day, and he asked me what happened, so I told him about Alex. And my dad kind of got down eye level with me and looked me dead in the eye and said that the next time I saw Alex, to tell him firmly to leave me alone, and if he still stuck his gum down my shirt, I was to punch him in the face. So Monday came, and I did what I was instructed when Alex came up to me and firmly told him to leave me alone. Alex laughed at me and proceeded to stick his used gum down my shirt anyway. So of course, cue step 2 in my dad's plan, which involved me punching Alex in the face. I did exactly that, but I didn't stop there. I don't remember this, but according to legend, if you want to call it that, I kind of hopped on top of him like I was Ralphie from A Christmas Story, and I walloped him just over and over, just wailing on him. I guess probably just letting it all out at that point. So my teacher came up to me and pulled me off of Alex, and of course I went to the principal's office. So the principal called my mom called my dad, and my dad told me, years later, before he passed away, that was one of his proudest moments as a parent. My mom, of course, didn't think so highly of the whole episode or of my dad's guidance. But it worked, and Alex left me alone for the rest of that year. So John Katz's analysis certainly seems to me like the sort of prescription my dad might have followed when he was growing up in the 1950s. I think that the sort of boy justice that Katz described is the type of justice my dad was telling me to seek out. So when I read that essay and read Katz's analysis, um, it seemed to me that following these rules, as they're laid out, will just sort of result in you ending up as someone who leads a life defined mostly by quiet rage, full of frustration, feeling inadequate for your inability to express what you're thinking or feeling, and filled with loneliness from the inability to form a connection because you've shut yourself off from anything meaningful for such a long time. Maybe that was kind of the point that Katz was trying to make, and if so, I found it kind of depressing. So the next discussion question was the end result of how they learn to behave as boys, says Katz, is that men find it difficult, quote, to make friends or to acknowledge our own fears and problems. They lack sensitivity. Do you agree? In your experience, is Katz's analysis accurate or inaccurate? Explain. So this one I had to sort of sit with for a while, and I really hate to agree with Katz. Because I just don't like the thought that so many men are out there living lives the way I outlined above, defined by that rage and frustration and feelings of inadequacy and inability to connect with anyone. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I've had that good upbringing, all things considered. We definitely had some rough patches financially, moved around a little bit when I was in middle and high school, but the constant throughout those kind of moments of upheaval in my life were that I always had a couple of extraordinarily down-to-earth and genuine examples of true empathy, and that was my mom and my grandma. So because of that, I don't think that I necessarily grew up following those rules. Having said that, though, when I look around at the lives of friends from my youth, I think it is pretty accurate to say that a lot of men really do struggle with a lack of sensitivity, and that those men often find it difficult to make friends or acknowledge fear or problems that they might be having. A guy that I knew very well and ran track with in high school had been struggling silently with drug addiction and depression, and he committed suicide a few years ago. Our relationship was very similar to the one of the two young boys that Katz discusses early on in his essay. We never really spoke about anything important. It was mostly girls, sports, video games, and he kind of came off as like a little bit impulsive, a little bit childish, and we sort of fell out of touch after graduation, but all of us who knew him were shocked when this news broke because he never spoke about those things, and he always seemed so happy-go-lucky and energetic and kind of full of life. So no one knew that he was struggling or dealing with addiction or depression. And it kind of makes me wonder, how many more men out there struggle with things like this that they feel they can't express or can't handle, and how many feel like they either can't or don't know to ask for the help they need. Yeah. So then, according to Katz, in the next question, women are puzzled by male culture. How, in his view, do women regard men? Do you agree or disagree with that analysis, and why? So he first published this essay in a magazine, what I understand to be for young women, called Glamour. So it's a little surprising to me that he described women as basically viewing men as kind of like a reclamation project. He described it on page 295 when he said women tend to see men as a giant problem in need of solution. And I kind of had a problem with that analysis. I think it might be true for some women, but most women that I personally know have little patience for that kind of man-child attitude. I think there's something to be said from the passage on 297 where he said that some men get shocked into sensitivity when they lose their jobs, their wives, or their lovers. Because sometimes it does take a terrible life event to make someone realize that the way they've been living and how they treat people just isn't working and isn't going to work. That said, though, the part that I had a problem with was that he sort of viewed women as fixers, because it seems a little bit outdated, and I think it places entirely too much emphasis on women's roles in fixing broken men who were let down by the process or the code that Katz was analyzing. And in my opinion, not enough emphasis seems to be placed on men to actually fix the process or the code itself. Yes, a loving partner who's understanding can shed light on things that you haven't realized about yourself, but I don't think that men need someone else to fix them. And I'd argue that men should place more importance on fixing themselves and on raising sons who don't follow the sort of antiquated rules around masculinity and what it means to be a boy. A process as ubiquitous, as universal, and still that is so broken and entrenched as this one is, it will take a long time to fix that. And there's no silver bullet or magic wand that we can really wave to make all of that better. And I think we're more likely to accomplish that retooling or that fixing of what it means to be a boy or a man by reforming from the inside out. The next question was, what evidence, if any, can you find in Katz's essay to indicate that the author has learned as an adult male to behave in ways he was not taught as a boy? By what processes, according to Katz, do men sometimes learn such new kinds of behavior? So he actually Katz mentions this toward the end of the essay on page 297, that some men get shocked into sensitivity when they lose their jobs, their wives, or their lovers. Others learn it through a strong marriage or through their own children. And that forms most of what it seems like he's learned as an adult in terms of how to behave in a way other than what he was taught as a boy. Maybe he experienced just one of those things, maybe he experienced all of them, and the process of evolving into a kinder, more empathetic or emotionally available person might have happened gradually for him. So switching gears a little bit to strategies and structure, the first question was, Katz tells a story in paragraphs 1 and 3 of a boy who prefers to get knocked down rather than be called a chicken. Why do you think he begins with this incident? What stage or aspect of the boy training process is he illustrating? So I believe that he's kind of touching on this to grab the reader's attention and show the reader a relatable example of boy training that they've likely seen some version of themselves on a playground or schoolyard when they were growing up, or like Katz was when he was walking his dog past the school. This anecdote also illustrates a couple of the rules or processes by which boys grow up, namely, don't be a goody-goody, never rat, if your parents ask about bruises, shrug, and never admit fear, ride the roller coaster, join the fist fight, do what you have to do, asking for help is for sissies. The second question here is that the longest of the anecdotes that Katz tells to show how boys learn to behave is the one about himself. Where does it begin and end? By what process or processes is he being taught here? So Katz begins this anecdote on page 296 in the first new paragraph on the page, and it ends at the third to last paragraph on that page. The processes by which he's being taught are kind of interwoven here. The chief violation seems to have been that he was a rat for telling his father who was responsible for his swollen face, which caused the bully to get in trouble. He was also afraid to admit fear because of that. Rather, because of that, he was subjected to repeated fistfights with the bully and just further bullying, having rat scrawled across his desk in crayon, which I thought was really just like a fun juxtaposition because you're thinking something very serious and you're considering all of the different ways that boys become boys and then boys become men, and just the idea of a crayon being used in like a threatening way was kind of a fun, lighthearted part of the essay, if you can call it lighthearted. It's a little bit intimidating. So the next question was, what is the role of the older cousin in the narrative that Katz tells about himself as a boy? How does the cousin's response in paragraph 13 illustrate the process Katz is analyzing? So his cousin kind of represents something of a counter bully or like a mob style fixer, like a fall guy in this portion of the essay. And he seems to be someone who's already been brought up by the very process that Katz is analyzing. He must have been familiar with the sort of boy justice that Katz describes in the essay, or else I don't know that Katz would have asked for his help in dealing with the bully. When he finally did ask his older cousin for help, after his cousin helped out, he kind of shamed Katz for it when he realized that the bully was really what the cousin would probably call a wimp. And Katz went on to sort of posit that men might have a hard time showing mercy in their adult lives because they receive so little of it as boys. So the next, second to last question here, where else in his essay does Katz tell a brief story to illustrate what he is saying about how boys are trained? How do those stories support his main point, and what would the essay be like without any of the stories? So he kind of weaves these stories about boy training throughout the entire essay. The most poignant one for me, I think, was at the end, where he's years into his own adulthood and he's walking his dog and sees exactly the same type of just like repugnant behavior being perpetrated by a group of boys toward another boy that they chose to pick on. So these stories kind of give a relatable, concrete example of the type of behavior that he's analyzing and actually kind of critiquing. Each story focuses on different aspects of the code or the process of how boys are conditioned to behave like boys, thus supporting his main arguments repeatedly, but from kind of different angles and in different ways. Without those stories, I think the essay would kind of fall apart. It would read a little bit more like an instruction manual, but sort of an abstract one that would be difficult to relate to or understand. Without these anecdotes, it's hard to build any sort of connection to the subject matter, I think. So the last question here, I'm sorry, this is the second to last one. Not quite off the hook yet. If you don't understand something about boys, you can't understand why men are the way we are, is a quote from the essay. To whom is Katz speaking here? What purposes might he have for explaining the male maturation process to this particular audience? So again, I'm not a reader of Glamour. I don't think I'm necessarily the target audience. But Katz is speaking to the very likely female reader of the Glamour magazine that this essay was first published in. The purposes of explaining the male maturation process to this particular audience could vary a bit. Perhaps he wants to give women or young women, I'm not really sure if it's a magazine geared toward like teenage women or young adult women. So just women in general, a bit of insight to the male psyche. This could be so that young men, and perhaps just men in general, are more understood by the opposite sex, leading to a deeper understanding and maybe even a little bit of pity or empathy toward men for the unfortunate shared experience that most of us have gone through as boys. He could also have been sharing the information to help explain why men are emotionally distant, why they lack empathy, or understanding and tend to kind of shy away from important discussions. He could have been trying to give women a bit of a lifeline so that they could more effectively understand certain men in their lives a little bit better or more completely than when they started reading the essay or before they started reading it. Besides analyzing the processes by which boys learn to behave according to a rigid code of conduct, Katz's essay also analyzes the lasting effects caused by this early training. What are those effects? And that's the last question. So he mentioned specifically in the first paragraph on page 297 when he details the impacts on men that the lessons from their boyhood have. To paraphrase, men are insensitive, uncertain, unable to admit when they're in trouble or when they need help, and they want love, affection, and support, but aren't able to ask for them, and they hide their weaknesses and fears even from the people that they care about the most. Men, I think, sort of what it boils down to, according to Katz, are also apathetic. They don't jump in when they see that someone needs help, and they're ostracized for being weird. And of course, those effects can linger and kind of seep into all sorts of areas of someone's psyche. Self-confidence, going to the idea of being weird. I think at least the millennial generation, we've done a pretty good job of embracing our quirks and our weirdness, not really shying away from it. But yeah, I thought overall this essay was super, super interesting, and especially at this moment where we are, where people are certainly more free to express themselves and be more open, I think, than probably any time since the 60s or 70s. So I thought it was a timely read, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope that everyone enjoyed my little analysis of it. I'll see you in class.